Trump wanted the ports. He wanted leverage over the harbors, the shipping lanes, the gateways where Canadian trade meets the sea. He pushed, he pressured, he made it a demand, the way he makes everything a demand. And Mark Carney answered with one word, not a speech, not a press tour, not a shouting match, one word. Then he went back to work, because while Washington was fixated on ports and pressure and dominance, Carney was quietly building something that made the whole demand irrelevant. This is not a story about a confrontation, it is a story about power, about who actually holds it, and about how the quietest man in the room may have already won. This is not opinion, this is not spin, this is a strategic shift happening in real time. Subscribe to Crisis Point right now, because this is the kind of breakdown you will not find anywhere else. And drop a comment below. Do you think Trump understands what he just lost? To understand why one word was enough, you have to understand what ports actually represent. They are not just concrete and cranes, they are choke points, they are leverage. Whoever controls the flow of goods through a harbor controls a piece of a nation's economic lifeblood. And for a man like Trump, who negotiates through pressure, choke points are everything. Control the choke point, control the outcome. That is the entire logic. If you can squeeze the place where trade flows, you can force the other side to the table on your terms. It is a strategy as old as commerce itself, and on paper, against a dependent partner, it should work. But here is the problem Trump never accounted for. A choke point is only powerful if the other side has no way around it. A dam only holds power over the river it blocks. Build a second channel, and the dam becomes a monument to nothing. And that is exactly what Carney had been doing long before the demand ever came. He was building second channels, new trade routes, new partners, new markets that did not run through the pressure points Washington wanted to control. So when Trump reached for the ports as leverage, he was reaching for a choke point that was already losing its grip. The threat assumed Canada had one way out. Carney had already been building three. Look at the two men, because the contrast explains the entire outcome. Trump operates on spectacle and dominance. He applies pressure. He makes demands. He wins by making the other side flinch. It works on people who need his approval. It works on people who fear his platform. It works on people trapped with no alternatives. Carney is the opposite in every way that matters. He is not a showman. He is a central banker. He ran the Bank of Canada. He ran the Bank of England. He does not think in news cycles. He thinks in balance sheets. He does not react to threats. He calculates exposure. And when a man like that faces a demand, he does not ask how loud he should answer. He asks whether the demand even has teeth anymore. That is why one word was enough. The word was not a surrender, it was not a negotiation, it was a dismissal, a quiet, confident refusal to treat a hollow demand as a real threat, because Carney understood something Trump did not. The power behind a demand comes from the target's fear. Take away the fear, and the demand collapses into noise. Carney was not afraid, because he had spent months making sure he did not need to be. He had built the alternatives. He had opened the other doors. He had reduced the exposure. So when the pressure came, he could meet it with a single word and mean it completely. That is what real leverage looks like. Not volume, not theater. The quiet ability to say no and make it stick. Now consider what Trump was actually betting on. His entire strategy rested on one assumption, an assumption that had held for decades. Canada had nowhere else to go. Roughly 3/4 of everything Canada exported flowed straight into the United States. That is not a partnership, that is dependency. And Trump understood that dependency instinctively. If Canada needed America to survive, then America could control the terms, squeeze the ports, threaten the trade, demand concessions, and Canada would fold, because what was the alternative? For decades there was no alternative. That was the bedrock of American leverage, and Trump built his demand on top of it, certain the bedrock would hold. Here is what he missed. Carney did not fight the demand head-on. He went after the assumption underneath it. He understood a rule Trump did not. You do not defeat leverage by pushing back harder. You defeat it by removing the source of the other side's leverage entirely. Canada's weakness was its dependence on one customer and the choke points that customer could squeeze. So Carney did not argue about the ports. He made them matter less, quietly, systematically. before the crisis forced his hand. While Trump built his pressure campaign, Carney was on planes to other capitals, signing agreements, opening new markets, diversifying the routes that trade could take. Every alternative he built made the ports less of a choke point and more of an option, not the only door, just one door among many. Think about the psychology of that. Trump's strategy only works if the target feels trapped. The demand only lands if there is no escape. So what happens when the target has quietly built the escape route before the demand ever arrives? The demand loses its power. Every new trade route, every new partner, every diversified relationship, each one weakened Trump's grip on the choke point, even though Trump was doing nothing differently. He kept making the same threats, kept assuming the same dependency, kept reaching for the same pressure points. But the ground beneath those pressure points had already shifted, and he did not seem to notice. That is what it looks like to be outmaneuvered, not defeated in a dramatic clash, slowly rendered irrelevant while you keep playing a game that no longer exists. And the action behind that one word never stopped. Look at the scope of what Carney was assembling while Washington fixated on the ports. He deepened Canada's relationship with the European Union, hundreds of millions of consumers with no connection to American choke points. He pushed into the Indo-Pacific, into trade blocs representing an enormous share of the global economy. He signed targeted deals opening new markets for Canadian energy, Canadian agriculture, Canadian critical minerals, the exact resources the world increasingly needs. Every move did the same thing. It reduced Canada's dependence on the United States. It gave Canada more routes, more buyers, more options. And options are the death of leverage. A country funneled through one choke point can be squeezed. A country with many routes cannot. Carney understood that better than almost any leader alive because he had spent his entire career studying how exposure decides the fate of nations. Here is the part that should worry American strategists. This is not a bluff, and it is not temporary. That distinction is everything. A bluff can be called, a tactic can be reversed, but what Carney is building is permanent. Once a country establishes real, functioning trade relationships with new partners, those relationships do not vanish when the political weather changes. The supply chains reorganize. The contracts get signed, the infrastructure gets built, the routes mature, and once that happens, there is no going back to a world where one nation's ports could hold another nation hostage. Carney is not threatening to diversify, he is executing a diversification already underway. Already funded, already delivering. Trump's power is loud but shallow. Carney's power is quiet but structural. And in the long run, structure beats noise every single time. Consider the timing, because the timing shows how sharp his instincts really are. Carney's answer landed at the exact moment American leverage was weakest. The United States is drowning in its own fiscal crisis. Its national debt has crossed $39 trillion. Its annual interest bill has topped $1 trillion. Its interest payments now consume a staggering share of the federal budget. Every major rating agency has stripped America of its top credit rating. Foreign investors who once trusted U.S. Treasuries as the safest asset on earth are quietly stepping back. And in the middle of all that turmoil, with Washington consumed by its own chaos, Carney saw the window. When your opponent is distracted, overextended, and financially strained, that is exactly when their demands carry the least weight. That is when one word is enough. And Carney delivered it while Trump was too preoccupied with his own crises to grasp how little his demand actually meant. History has a pattern here, and every serious observer knows it. Dominant powers almost always lose their grip the same way, not through a single dramatic defeat, through slow complacency. They assume their choke points are permanent. They assume the smaller players stay dependent. They assume that because things have always been a certain way, they always will be. And by the time they realize the world has built its way around them, it is far too late. Trump built his demand on the assumption that the ports still held decisive power. Carney built his entire response on proving they did not. One man was defending the past, the other was building the future. That is the whole story of how one quiet word defeated the loudest demand in global politics. So where does that leave Trump? In the worst position of all. He strengthened the very outcome he was trying to prevent. Every demand gave Carney another reason to diversify. Every threat over the ports gave Canada another argument for building routes that bypassed them. Every attempt to squeeze a loyal partner accelerated the search for alternatives. Trump thought he was applying pressure. He was providing motivation. He handed Carney the political cover to do exactly what a disciplined risk manager wants to do anyway. Reduce dangerous concentration in a single choke point. And the harder Trump pushed, the more reasonable Carney's diversification looked to the Canadian public and to global investors. In trying to seize control of Canada's gateways, Trump gave Canada every reason to build new ones. That is not winning. That is the opposite of winning. And that is why Carney could answer with one word and walk away, not because of a dramatic takedown, because he understood something Trump did not. The real contest was never about who could win a confrontation over ports. It was about who was building the future and who was clinging to the leverage of the past. While Trump chased the demand of the day, Carney was assembling a structural advantage that would outlast every headline. He did not need to win the argument. He needed to make the argument irrelevant. And by the time the noise faded, the outcome was already taking shape. Canada with routes, Canada with alternatives, Canada with leverage of its own. A country that no longer had to fear a threat to its ports because it had spent its time making sure no single choke point could ever hold it hostage again. Now stop and think about what that really means going forward. Leverage, once lost, is almost impossible to recover. The moment a partner discovers it has other routes, the fear that once made it compliant simply evaporates. Washington spent decades relying on one unspoken assumption. Canada's trade had to flow through the channels America could control. That assumption is dissolving in real time, and when it is gone, every future demand carries less weight than the last. The United States will find itself pressuring a partner that can simply root around it. And a partner that can root around you is a partner that no longer has to say yes. That is the true cost of what Trump reached for, not a single lost demand. The permanent erosion of the choke points America always believed it controlled. The lesson stretches far beyond these two men. It is a lesson about the nature of real power in the modern economy. Loud power seizes choke points. Quiet power builds around them. Trump commands the demand. Carney commands the map. And in the end, the map decides which nations can be squeezed and which cannot. Pressure over a choke point feels powerful in the moment, but it is fragile. It depends entirely on the target having no other route. The moment other routes exist, the choke point becomes just another port. Carney understood that the most powerful thing he could do was not to fight over the harbor, but to quietly make it one option among many. That is the move Trump never anticipated, and it may define this entire era of North American economic relations. So here is the question worth sitting with. When the history of this decade is written, will it remember the man who demanded the ports, or the man who built his way around them with a single word? Because right now, quietly, deliberately, route by route, one of these leaders is redrawing the economic map of an entire continent while the other keeps reaching for choke points that no longer choke anything. The pressure is fading, the leverage is shifting, the alternatives are real. And the man who said one word may have just accomplished more than every demand Washington could make. If this breakdown gave you something the mainstream completely missed, subscribe to Crisis Point right now and hit the bell, because the next move in this story is already being negotiated in a room you will never see. Drop a comment below and tell me. Do you think Trump has been outmaneuvered, or can he still turn this around? I read every single one, and this story is far from over.